Well, welcome, Ann, to the podcast. So this is the Kevin Polky The Journey podcast, and thank you for coming in and being able to share this time with us. So, if you could just maybe start us off with just maybe because I've known you now for a while, and are through not only through church but then also through other circles, and we've done some work together and done a couple different things, but. If you, outside of work and spending time with your husband Jim, what do you do for fun? What do you do? Yeah, what do you do for fun?
For fun, I love to dance, actually.
Okay.
And I love. I'm learning to play bridge now.
Okay.
This is the latest fun thing.
Okay.
It's quite a challenge, but there's an odd piece of fun because when you take lessons, you're with all newbies. No one knows what they're doing.
Okay.
So there's always an element of fun in that.
Okay.
And then Jim and I love to travel, and our focus or our shared value when we travel is architecture and history.
Yep.
And, we're focusing on our own United States, actually, since we've been semi-retired, and a little bit before that. So.
Okay, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So bridge now I don't know much about bridge.
Golf. I should have mentioned golf.
Oh, you golf too.
That's the summer one. Yeah.
Okay. So golf during the warmer months,
right?
And then you can bridge or dance during the little bit cooler months. And so with bridge, is that an independent, or obviously
No,
you're playing with other
it's
individuals?
It's very team-oriented. It's partnership-oriented, which is really great for me to learn again in a different on a different plane, a different arena, how to work with another person to achieve a goal.
Sure.
It's very interesting because in bridge you're partnered up to defend or to win.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And then you're learning dance. And what kind of
dance is actually part of my exercise program. It started that way.
Okay.
Actually, it started years ago. When I was in high school, I always loved to dance. And I grew up watching my parents dance.
Okay. And so what kind of dance lessons or classes are you taking?
It's like a jazzercise. It's multifaceted, all different ages from, there's some 30-somethings in there, 30-something-year-olds in there, all the way up to, very active senior women like myself.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. We have a great instructor. She's highly energized, so we learn that. We get to hear the latest music and the newest dances.
There you go.
It's
okay,
fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, because when you were saying dancing, I was thinking like ballroom dancing and that type of dancing. But you don't.
Jim and I actually went back and spiffed up our little dance thing when our sons got married. We went and took lessons for 3 or 4 months.
Okay, all right.
But this is just my thing.
Your
it's
thing.
Other dance.
Okay. So for exercise and and we'll get into some of where that led even more so into your life now. But before we jump into that, tell me a little bit. Are you from the Rockford area? Have you lived?
I am.
Okay, so you lived here and graduated from what high school? Boylan. Okay. And so I know one part of your story was that you've worked in the medical field now, in the health field, and how long? When did you start that? How did you get into the health field?
It's interesting. I was a traditional educator. I was a reading specialist in both the public schools and the private schools for many years, for over 20 years, and then I knew it was time to leave. I wanted to leave happy. I was tired, but I was still happy doing what I was doing. And I wanted to pursue my creative side, which at that time was horticulture and design. I had been art had been my minor in college. So anyway, I pulled out of traditional teaching in the middle schools and high schools, and I pursued being an apprentice for a landscaping company.
Okay.
And they were happy to have me. They knew I was a very motivated learner, and I shadowed one of the owners actually for 6 months, and I ended up working for them as a design contractor actually for about 5 years, and I loved it.
Okay.
And then we had the recession in 2008.
Okay, yeah.
And that's when this weird transition occurred where someone in the community who knew me from the neighborhood and high school and all the circles, as we know, the world is very small, especially in Rockford.
Yeah.
And we were at a luncheon, and she said, "I'd like to have lunch with you. I'd like you to come and teach adults and work with me." And I knew she was in the healthcare field.
Okay.
And she said, "I think you would be really great with family dynamics and the family issues, and you will be able to learn everything you need to know medically to do this from your life experience." And that. So anyway, that there was a lot of resistance. I met her for lunch, resistance on my part. I didn't want the bureaucracy of the health system.
Sure, yeah.
And this was one of the smallest, most private companies that was really a great new idea on how to bring very good health care to seniors that were either suffering from memory loss or all of the multiple issues that geriatric patients have. So I kind of shifted into my social service side and learned how to do assessments in depth, family dynamics with adult children who did not want to deal with their aging parents and the hard decisions that came with that. And then the medical apprenticeship was wonderful. She's Bernie Marinelli actually is the psych nurse and the person who initiated very good health care for seniors in Rockford and started the Onum campus on Newbrook Road.
Yeah. So and that's probably, Bernie and I worked together at Oakwood Hospital way back in the early 90s. And then I think that's when you approached me.
Yes.
And we did some bridging at that time, partnering with KP Counseling at that time. So and even though we knew each other through family and church, that was when we started doing some more work from a professional standpoint. But your focus was primarily toward the caretaker of the individual who was being affected.
Yes. And that's when I was so happy for our relationship to grow in the professional side, because I needed access to counseling for these adult children and the caretakers, caregivers, whatever you choose to say. I needed to have someone I trusted who would be able to meet these family members. And that's kind of how that all happened. Yeah, we did the workshops together.
I had forgotten about some of those. And that was, I remember also trying to make some attempts of bring awareness to the community regarding Alzheimer's and dementia and just a multitude of things that may affect individuals, but how to keep them within the home as long as possible.
How to keep them within the home, and how to give the family the support they need in every area, whether it was medical, legal, social, if they were vets, educationally, spiritually, whatever they needed. There's a big grief component with geriatric illnesses for the family.
And I think that element too of not only the grief after someone dies, but then the grieving of someone being limited physically, being limited mentally or emotionally, and then the caregiver seeing that their life is now changing and they're grieving. This is maybe not how they planned on retirement being.
The loss of a spouse or a parent who was very active and independent, but they're walking around in front of you with very few of their skills and their dynamic left, or it's so altered from the illness or the medicine that it's very, very full of grief.
Yeah. I know a part of your journey, your own individual journey, was about personal growth and personal, your own personal growth. And when did that all come about, of being interested in your own personal development? I mean, being a teacher, maybe there's a draw toward that, but but not always. not every teacher, So tell us a little bit about your own personal journey.
In the late 70s and early 80s, I made a transition through recognizing my my own involvement in the disease of alcoholism, my own, and then I started studying the family, the extended family. I knew that I had been suffering from alcoholism, and sought recovery. And it changed my life only for the better. And it allowed me to, I think, be of greater service to every person in my life, because I was aware of the silent illness that plagues our society, this addiction. And that's continued ever since 1980 for me, on many levels, through service and through sharing recovery with whomever may want it, and through trying to really live it in everyday business, all the awarenesses that come to us in recovery, that I may be dealing with a child of an alcoholic, or an extended family member, or someone who may be suffering from it.
Sure.
Or a professional, actually, who's just never had to learn about it, who just has not had to learn about it. I know that's hard to believe today in this society, but it's true. There are people who really don't understand it. So.
Well, and you said something that we differentiate, because you refer to recovery, not just sobriety. And, And talk a little bit about that. Talk about that a little bit, about the difference for you of recovery.
For me, meant literally going over or recovering the ground of my life from when I was a young person. The ignorance around alcoholism in, I think that the post-World War II generation, and the people who grew up then, like my parents and other people, they had no idea what they were dealing with. And my extended family. And many families. The drinking piece, or for some people the drug piece, is an antidote to the inability to find a strength to meet life. And so the exit from that challenge is whatever's near. It happened to be alcohol for me, but it's not always that for people. And I learned that recovering the ground and looking at my life with a companion, a professional companion, was a very healthy thing to do. So I could continue to create new ground, not just stay back there. I believe it's a part of the journey, but it's not where you stay. You know, my past is an asset, but it's not where I live. And I've created, and God's helped me create a new life that keeps changing.
It definitely keeps evolving. Even since we've known each other, it has changed and evolved. And I think that idea of if the amount of energy that we use to keep something in the past suppressed, then causes other difficulties, and then to anesthetize it, so either to sleep or to feel different or whatever it may be, then that in itself becomes a behavioral pattern that causes a problem, right?
Right.
So going back and revisiting that, going back and maybe having a different perspective today versus if it happened when you were a child,
Right.
you have an 8-year-old's perspective.
Right.
But you may be now 50 or 60 years old, still looking at it from an 8-year-old's perspective, and that's, at least for me, some of the reasons why we need to go back and revisit it,
Right.
so that we can get maybe a different perspective on
Yes.
it. I think of there's certain movies that I watched when I was growing up, and they were my favorite movies, and I hadn't seen them for a long time, but in my mind they looked a certain way, and then I go to watch them, I'm like,
That's a
wow,
good example.
oh goodness, this is not even the same. And
I always think of going back to the grade school. I hope someone else has done this, and you see the drinking fountain in the grade school.
yeah, they're only like this high.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah.
It's amazing the perspective as we revisit a place that's a mental place or an emotional place or a physical place, how different we relate to it. So,
and I think if you can do that with someone, if you can go back to that, and then there's energy that's released,
right,
and then there's a freedom that comes from that, and so then it becomes just part of your journey. It's no longer the journey.
And a value, the value of healing and being a companion healer can only come through, for me, my experience and my faith combined. I believe the work that many religious figures did, but what Christ did on earth was healing. And there were participants in that. And I think the greater purpose is to bring what helped us heal to others. Pretty simple.
Well, and I know, having worked with the 12 steps the majority of my career, I don't know if someone told me this or just kind of revealed itself to me, is that of the 12 steps, there's two components to it that are weaved through all the steps, and all of the different principles is humility and spirituality. And so talk a little bit, you just talked about humility but talk about the spirituality piece. How does that play a part in your recovery and your journey?
It's everything. My body, mind, and spirit are integrated like everybody's is meant to be. And the disintegration of that, where the spirit separates, or the mind separates, or the body separates from an experience, which I want to get back to later, because that happened to me again. The spirituality demands and challenges me to listen to the voice. That it's not just the voice I hear. I believe the Holy Spirit is always calling people to a better life. And whatever the distraction, whatever the work that becomes obsessive and covers up that voice, has to be addressed. And that's so my jumping off place in the morning, actually a chair very similar to this, is where I start my day and make the contact I need to make and pray. The same things I did as a child, actually. Okay. But with a lot more perspective and awareness. Sure. Reaching out to a God that's stronger than I am, that can help me with whatever today's going to bring. And the spirituality of seeing everyone is full of spirit, and can I recognize that even on a bad day, and can I try to relate to that if they're willing to let me? The God of my childhood was was inside of me. The God of my childhood was part of my awareness. When I would lay on the grass or sit at the sandbox or help my mom garden, and when they taught me to pray, it was many pieces of people giving me both their experience and then the natural awareness inside of me. And then I went to Catholic school, and I had a pretty good experience. I know there's a lot of bad press about the Catholic Church and the Catholic religion. I was very fortunate. I came into that in the 60s, when the transition or the renewal of the church was very hot and very energetic, the Second Vatican Council. And it was about the fundamental strong doctrines, but also incorporating liturgy and incorporating scripture and incorporating the Holy Spirit more than rituals. So I was very fortunate I got in on that side of it.
Sure.
And as I progressed, and however the drinking piece, however that happened, and started to interfere, my world expanded, and I did know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was very powerful, but I don't think I wanted to commit to the challenge that was required to make that a regular, to make that a commitment. I just don't think I was ready for that.
Sure.
And I had an accident in 1973. I went through a storm door. A March wind blew a storm door in my face, and I tried to stop it, and I severed my ulnar artery and my ulnar nerve, and I pretty much bled to death. I was on a porch of an apartment, and I had my near-death experience. And I met this power that said it was fine. It was wonderful for me to be dying, that I can still remember this as if it was happening right now. It was okay to be dying. It was perfect to be with God. And I was told I could not stay, and that it would kill my mother if I died the way I was going to die. It would hurt her too much to have me bleed to death on a porch. And that experience kind of pushed me into a very almost like a comatose state of all is right with the world, and too bad for you, kind of. It was like everything was wonderful. I understood that I had worried too much most of my life, and I had too much rigidity about God's power and love. It offset a lot of false guilt that I had developed over the years. And that was, I think, the first part of this journey to recovery, where I gave up or I surrendered to this power. And I did do that. And in many recovery programs, recognizing that people have to seek the God of their understanding is the critical piece that allows people to keep seeking, actually responding to, I believe, the God who's seeking them. So I was able to recover and look at my Catholic background and be very tolerant in understanding that God is working through all events, that whole idea of divine providence, working through all things that are horrendous and man-made, but can take that and redeem them and help people feel the love of people, if that's how they're going to feel it, and understand that's really God in those people. So I had all of that through my recovery because I had to learn how to use my left hand again, my left arm again from this
accident.
Yeah, the accident on the porch. So, opening up to how God works is a big piece of recovery.
Well, what you said there about that experience that you had, like I know Bill Wilson talked about, having a spiritual awakening, and nothing was the same after that. And once you experience something like that, you can't unexperience it. It's
right. You can't unknow it.
Yeah, you
can't unknow.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're willing to surrender to it yet, and then because of fear or because of whatever may be going on. But you've tasted something, and you can't not have tasted it, and so I think that's that was one of the stories I'd never heard before. So that's a pretty amazing. And how old were you about?
I was 22, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then you had to go through
22 or 23.
Go through obviously a rehab time of rehabilitating your and that whole component. And you said it was your left hand? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. They had to sew my hand back on, basically.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of is going to segue to where I wanted to.
Laughing in the face of death. This is kind of where we're going.
This is kind of where we're going.
Yeah, because that seems to be the theme.
Yeah. So after your time, the bulk of your time when you were working with Bernie, as that was starting to come to an end, and you were shifting again, and you came up with an idea.
My mom. Well, a couple things happened. I was getting tired. I also had a vague sense that it was time to continue doing what I was doing. I loved helping families with these geriatric illnesses. I still do. But it was going to be different. We had an intense growth period with Satori Pathway. It's still in operation. I'm still a piece of it. I'm still a part of it. I write for the newsletter, and I still meet with families who are suffering. But I needed to not be working so much with just that. I had a sense that I needed to get clear on expanding a little bit with my life experience and somehow using that. I didn't know if it was going to be writing or whatever it was going to be. So I pulled out of full-time work and went to part-time work with her in Satori. And then my daughter-in-law contracted cancer. And that started to shake my world in a different way. The mortality piece, the how abruptly things can change piece, just like going through the door. The way I transitioned into recovery, one day I was a drunken woman, and the next day I was a recovering person. That fast. And that's how it was when my dear daughter-in-law Danielle was ill. And I thought, I need to get clear on what I'm doing here again. It was time for a revamping or a sharpening or a honing of where I was going and what I was doing. So I started piecing this idea of what am I leaving behind if I would if I would contract cancer, if I would die, or if I was pulled out of the picture, and what had other people left me. And between my father's death and my father-in-law's death, actually, and Danielle's illness, I had a drive to create something that would provoke people. I didn't want them to have to wait, like I had kind of waited till I was in my mid-60s. I wanted to give them a tool. So, why not?
Sure.
One Why not? So I started writing this idea of our legacy, which is not about leaving a pile of cash, and it's not about being famous, I don't think. It's about how am I living that's affecting people, and that's going to influence them. Because I was highly influenced by people like my father and my father-in-law and other people who left true value in their actions through their sacrifice to their country, their sacrifice to their family, their sacrifice to their neighborhood, their civil sacrifice in the community. And so that started me writing the Legacy Project, and basically was a bunch of questions, a lot of questions.
Right.
Shaking out what was taking my time away at that point in my mid-60s from what I perceived as maybe the last 20 to 30 years of my life. You know, if I could live to be 100, that'd be fine. But right now, it's looking like 90 is the statistic.
Sure, right. Yeah, 91,
that's right.
92.
90 to 92 is what they're saying we're going to live to, Kevin. So that started the Legacy Project. And then we talked, and I asked for your input, and you thought it was a great idea to pursue, and offered me a venue to do it in when I was ready, and to help me sort of critique it and get it going. And I was there. I mean, I had created it. I thought I had created it. And we were almost ready to do it. We were getting ready to draw people in and ask people to come to a workshop. And then September 18th happened.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, and you take your time, but
I'm teary because I'm reliving a year ago in a good way. I have so much gratitude that I am upright and I am doing this and free of some of the things that had taken over my life. Some of the hesitations, and I'm not sure what else. I'm not sure what else, but September 18th, I was going to meet a friend for lunch, and as you know, I was crossing this street on State and right by the City Hall to go to one of our brand new restaurants downtown, and I waited for the crosswalk light like you're supposed to do, and I saw the little people come in, the picture there, and I took a step off the curb and walked 2 or 3 steps, and a very large Mercury Sable came around the corner 35 miles an hour. And I remember only the heat of the motor and the impact, and thinking I'm probably going to die or I'm going to be very injured. And I was very injured. I went up and I came down, and it's funny, I thought about this shoe this morning. It's in my envelope. This was ripped apart off the ground when I was pivoted by this car. It pulled it apart. I had these sandals on. It was a beautiful autumn day, very warm enough to wear sandals. And when I came down, I was crushed onto the pavement with a lot of damage to my left side, multiple fractures, leg and arm, and internal injuries. And I was very fortunate. I was near Swedes. I was only a few minutes away. But that was the beginning of a lot of physical pain, psychic pain, and a huge spiritual journey of reliance and belief that my God was going to get me through this. And I was going to be able to be of some use again and have some piece of my life back. I couldn't walk. It was my left side. I was dominantly left-handed. I had recovered all that from that other accident. And I had multiple fractures on my humerus and this shoulder and my left leg. And anyway, I was in rehab for many months at Van Meter. And I learned I had no weight bearing for 3 months. I had this hand and this leg to use. That was it. To learn to live again and function again, and with my non-dominant side, and then finally got out of the wheelchair. Actually, in December, it was a year ago, I got out of the wheelchair and was using a walker and learning how to do that. And I kept looking, because I was home a lot. I couldn't go very many places. I kept looking at my stack of work I had thought I was going to be doing, and I kept seeing this legacy folder, and I thought, I'm not doing that legacy thing. There's no way I'll be able to do that. And a couple other things. And I let it sit, and then I finally asked my nurse to put it away. I put it away, and in the cupboard, kind of, I just didn't want to deal with it. And anyway, part of my recovery ended up being that my husband and I went to Florida in January, where it was warmer. We went toward the end of the month, where I didn't have to deal with ice and snow, because I had to learn how to walk again. And I had my therapy orders down there, swimming pool, the whole bit. It was wonderful, and a lot of friends we'd made in Florida. And again, to me, God's world, when you sit by the ocean and you look at that order, the order of the tides that they publish every day, by the minute, and that was very profound for me, that there was still order, because this chaotic piece was really challenging me. And my counselor at the time said, your inability to recognize or acknowledge the chaos that's in the world is going to stop you from getting better.
Say that again.
My inability to really acknowledge that there is chaos in the world. But the foundation of the world is like the tides. It's the order, it's the order by the minute of what God has created. That kairos, that kind of time, that CHIROS time, that's God's time, is the fundamental foundation. And then our humanity gets in the way with this chaos we create through our will. And so I was able to do my physical recovery down there and heal a great deal. I came back, and I think we talked on the phone. A couple times, and I don't know if you remember that or not, but I think you encouraged me to come see you when I came back to Rockford, that you wanted me to come back and talk about doing the legacy piece.
It's, and I don't know if you recall because of that, but 3 months prior, almost to the day, is when I had my accident, right?
Yes.
And so, and though it was different, a different type of scenario, it was unexpected, and because of where mine was, it just happened to be the whole process of getting from the mountains in Colorado to back to Rockford, right? But But when you think back to that, the physical part of our body's healing, as my doctor had told me, Kevin, this is what's going to happen. Physically, the flesh, physically, the bones, physically, this, the tendons, the ligament, they're going to heal at a certain amount of time, give or take, a little bit. But for you, when you think about the mental or the psychological piece, what when you think back to that time period, what do you think was one of the things that was pulling? Like I remember for me, it was as if I was on a path, and if I thought my thoughts going left would be, I would awfulize, I would do all these different types, and I had to consciously stay right in the moment, which was like turning right. I had to consciously.
Exactly.
I only know this. I don't know.
Exactly. It was the profound 1 day at a time.
Yeah.
Changed to 1 hour at a time.
Yeah.
It was 1 hour at a time of being able to stand safely, move safely, and within my disability, to be able to choose. That was something I was aware of, that I had choices even in my disability, how I related to my beautiful nurse, Augusta. And my husband, this happened to him too. We don't talk about that a lot, but this happens when we have events happen that are major events. It happens to a spouse if you are married, if you're connected. So I had an awareness that I could go through this a number of ways, and I didn't think about this at the time. It was all very quick. It was just like the accident. It was so fast, this processing of what I must do to survive and get better. It was exactly that. And I was a real survivor. It was all about obeying the therapist, listening to my psychiatrist that I had been assigned at, who dealt with traumatic injury. And listening to the fundamentals and keeping it simple. It was about repairing my body first. And I knew the mind would wait. The mind will wait and wait and wait till you're ready to handle it. That, to me, is also spiritual. The way our brain is created. It's like the pan on the back of the stove. It's there if you need it. You don't need to deal with it yet. It's going to be there. No one's going to take it. It's going to stay there.
Right.
And my mental peace was so damaged from this event. My sense of safety in the world, my fear of depending on others, finding the balance of getting help and not becoming a dependent. There was something I had to deal with spiritually, like, how could God let this happen to me? That whole thing was a string in there. That's when I was able to introduce and kind of start to integrate the idea of chaos that I didn't like, because chaos to me was always related to evil and not the beauty piece of God's world. So, yeah, my mental piece was totally focused on therapy and exercise, and kind of like, was I being decent to people?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Was I getting to be a self-centered little patient? So
Sure. And I remember that having to choose, and if I did get into a bad spot, which happened, how long was I going to stay there?
Right.
What things did I do to perpetuate being in that funk or being in that negative or critical mood, and what things were I doing to release it and get back to where, like a balanced state,
Right. I don't know if this is a mental piece, but I wanted to I wanted to address the fears around this too with the relationships. My kids looked at me differently. My kids are adults in their 30s, and they had never seen me this dependent or broken. And I don't know who had more trouble. I don't need to analyze it, but it was pretty emotional for them and for me. And there was some carryover from that for a while. We've talked about. I've tried to share with them what I learned from that experience.
When you think of that event, and maybe it was during the rehab, but if there was a beginning of a turning point, of a beginning of a space where, again, not necessarily physically, but more about the mental, emotional piece, that it started shifting for you, like a surrender or releasing. What?
I was in Florida.
Okay.
It's very interesting you asked that. I'd kind of forgotten this. Jim had taken his walk. He had his little morning routine. I was alone, and I was just learning to drive again in this small condo community that we were in. And I went around a roundabout, and two couples jumped out of nowhere into the street. They were crossing the street. And for me to avoid hitting them, which was so ironic, I had to go up on a curb, and I hit a big boulder, and I wrecked the side of my car. It was so traumatic and anger-making at the same time for me. A lot of things happened to get my car where it needed to be, and I had to ask for help. Jim was nowhere to be found. He was out on his walk, which was interesting. I had to deal with all of this alone. For the first time, I was alone since the accident. I got back to our condo, and I was sitting there, and I was really disturbed. I realized I couldn't function right. I was too emotional. Very, very aware of the brain, the emotional piece rather than the physical piece. For the first time, I saw how crushed I was. And I remember, this is my experience, a voice saying, there are forces that do not want you to get healed all the way, that do not want you well. You need to pray for total healing and the willingness to be healed all the way. And that to me meant, because I was walking and driving, physically I was getting healed. It was the mind and the heart. I really had to start praying to get done and move forward with the fear piece, the people, all of that. It was really profound. And it was like a total moving forward and saying, I don't have to be, my identity doesn't have to be the woman who got run over by the car. Even though that's what we're talking about.
Sure.
It only comes out when it's going to be abuse or when it's initiated by someone else, for the most part, a direct question. Most people would never know by the way I walk, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. So it's interesting. What it just came to when you just said that is that at that moment where I have to once again surrender. I have to look at everything. It's not just a physical component, but I have to look at the psychological wounds that you had mentioned that came as a result of being traumatized and a victim of this traumatic event. But it's very similar to when you described earlier with alcoholism, in that you no longer were about being the alcoholic or whatever. It was about recovery. It was about surrendering not just the behavior, but the thinking patterns, surrendering, what
view
that
of
old
the world perspective.
What that old God looked like, what that old perspective was, and in similar, taking those tools, I imagine that was also part of the things you had done before in other circumstances in recovery as you went through the accident when you were in your 20s, and had to reinstitute that.
Right. Exactly.
I remember when my accident happened, and people, because they don't know what to say, and so they say things, and
Right, they don't know what to say.
They go, oh, well, God, this must be God's way of telling you to slow down, or this may be, silly things like that, right? And I'm like, no, this happened because of gravity.
Exactly.
It's like if there was no gravity, I wouldn't have ever, had the problem. We'd have other problems maybe, but it wouldn't be that one,
right. The human element is that chaos element I didn't want to talk about with people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily mean, just like you avoided hitting those people and end up hitting that rock.
Yes.
We don't have to have a villain in the story.
Exactly.
Exactly. Bad things can happen even if there isn't a villain.
Exactly.
And I remember that part of being so angry because it was a certain part of my rehab, but I still was a long ways away. And for the first time since this happened, I was angry, and I had nowhere to go with it.
I love what you brought up about people don't know what to say, and they need to integrate it with their prior knowledge or their fundamental outlook on the world. Yeah. And I have great compassion for people who hear about this or who were with me at that time. They don't know what to say. Yeah. And it's like after a death. Mm-hmm. A lot of people can't just say. A few friends said to me, actually, I don't know what to say. Yeah. Right. Except I'm so sorry this happened to you. But they didn't try to explain it for me. Yeah. And that helped a great deal. Yeah. And I've carried that one with me, to other people.
3 years ago when your father-in-law, right, and that was last Friday, and 3 years ago is when tomorrow will be when my father-in-law died. Yes. And I remember being at that funeral and watching people come through the visitation, and the ones that were just there, maybe didn't say anything at all, maybe just said, we're sorry, or whatever it may have been, those touched me more. And yes. I know for the kids and Diane and Delinda and Donna, just being there,
just the people showing up.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily what the words didn't necessarily. The more simple, the more impactful. Right?
It was the showing up. That's kind of hackneyed phrase now, showing up, but it's true because it represents their time. Right. That's the piece that has really come forward in this. That they would take the time to come and stand in a line and look at you and look at your family during this thing. The people that showed up at my door surprised me, who took the time, and the people who did not take the time. It's interesting. Yeah. But the presence. Yeah. That was another gift from this experiences. I'm sure you know.
Yeah, and I think it's how each person deals with that a little bit differently,
right?
And each person wants something a little bit differently, at different times too. But I want to move a little bit into as we move into this idea of like this legacy program is now being now I want to say resurrected, but really it kind of got put on a shelf for a bit, right? As you were rehabbing. But tell us a little bit about what it is now because of this latest experience that you went through, and then what would you want people to know about it? And
one of the gifts, one of the pearls from the accident was I lost a piece of me that really cared about how you viewed me. That was a huge piece that went away. So any hesitation about how legacy would be perceived went away. And I thought, it's worth a try. I was motivated to do this. It doesn't need to be a huge success, but I think it's of value. I hope it's of value. I'm going to try it. It was very light. I had a much lighter feel when I came into actually trying it. Like, let's go for a walk there, somewhere I'd never been, a new path. Yeah. It wasn't a big mission. It was like an exploration. And it's interesting because that's exactly what legacy is. When I have the groups gather, and I've done 3 of them, we gather and I simply ask questions and let them speak among themselves, take notes. I have some provocative ideas on a overhead kind of thing, and we discuss at the will of the group, actually, their experience with people who have left a legacy, people who maybe failed to give them a legacy, and what they want to do about that in their own life, and the different aspects of what we give our children, our family, our friends, and the community, knowingly or unknowingly. This is I don't want to get too heavy, but the consciousness of what I'm doing, we don't want to be so self-centered we're taking our pulse every minute, but to at least have a direction and provoke these people into a more focused direction in their life.
A couple things that you said, when you talked about earlier with recovery, that it wasn't just about alcohol anymore, but it talked about other things. And one of the phrases that I've heard or you use is having integrity in all our affairs, being life-giving in everything that we do. And then what I just heard you just comes to mind as I've sat in the groups is this idea of being intentional. Yeah. And if I'm doing life intentional, it's very similar when we're rehabbing, right? From a physical injury and psychologically, we have to learn how to be intentional when we learn how to walk again.
Right.
And if we're living life with that intention, then we have a much better idea. Instead of life happening to us, we can be in that flow. We can be in that space. And just like you told me earlier about as you were going through your morning ritual and meditating this morning,
this ugly little shoe.
Yeah.
It was ripped off my foot.
Yeah. And I think it's listening to that voice, listening to that nudge, regardless if it's to bring it as an illustration and a symbol of what happened, or if it's prompting you to start a program like Legacy, to call somebody, to go and visit somebody.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't really know where the shoe was. It had been brought home and put somewhere, and I just saw it. I just saw my husband put it in an envelope by a number of things I had been collecting, because I'm also writing a book. And it was in this envelope, and I found it by accident over the weekend when I was kind of straightening things out for Christmas stuff. There it was. Sure. So,
Yeah.
But I have enjoyed doing the Legacy so far. I hope people will think about it as an adventure, and it's fun. The people seem to relate to each other, whether they know each other or not. They're there to learn something about themselves and other people. And I think we're going to have one April 26th. It's a Friday morning in the spring. I like it to be in the spring when people are energized with new life. And then I'll do one in May in the evening. I think May 8th is a Wednesday. So.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to after the holidays. I know you and Jim are going to Florida for a few months and to visit your new home, and that's another part of
return to my water project.
Yes.
That's the other piece of intentional choices. I'd been fascinated by the idea of the water in our world being so badly affected, and for the future as a grandmother. I want my grandchildren to have what we had, which was never a care about having clean water or enough water. So I contacted the University of Florida. This all happened again way before the accident, like 4 years ago, and I volunteered to be trained for water research program in Florida, which I was able to do actually last year with my little cane. I went out and collected the water, and there's a certain protocol you follow, and they take it and test it, and they can tell where the bad stuff's coming into the Gulf and who to go speak to about what they're putting in the water. So I'm going to be part of that again. I'm kind of committed to that as my bigger piece, the bigger circle, my family, the community, and then kind of the world. You want to do something, I think, to give back.
Yeah.
I've been given so much.
Yeah. If it's the water project, if it's the groups that you work with, either through AA or through just your circle of people, either through church or through other organizations, and then now this with Legacy, you have a good story to tell, and in being able to share some of your experiences is, I think, what is an opportunity for people to also have hope, and because if Ann and Kevin could do it,
right,
that means they're capable of doing it too.
Happens to you, yes.
Right.
There is support to meet the challenge.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming in. We will.
Thanks, Kevin.
We'll definitely, if you're open to it, maybe in the future, a year from now or whatever it may be, have you come back and see how everything's going. Okay. Because I imagine there'll be a new adventure.
Oh, it looks like there could be, the way things.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Yeah.